All right, and good afternoon. I'd like to welcome and introduce Dr. Robert Murphy, Executive Director of the Institute for Global Health and the John Philip Fair Professor of Infectious Diseases here at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine, who answers your COVID questions every Tuesday and Thursday here on the Institute for Global Health's Facebook page. And today, Dr. Murphy will be answering viewer-submitted questions that we've received through today, the 16th of September. And we invite you to continue to submit your questions to us via Facebook at NU Institute for Global Health or directly via email at globalhealthinstitute@northwestern.edu. And leading the discussion again today is Vinay Darbakula, who is an intern this summer with the Institute. So Vinay, I now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kristen. So as we always do, we'll start today with some updated statistics for the United States as well as the state of Illinois. For the United States, the vaccination rate, as we talked about on Tuesday and weeks past, continues to see a very gradual increase in the amount of people who are getting vaccinated. When we look at last time we did the segment, there were about 52% people getting vaccinated or who are fully vaccinated. Today, there's about 52.3% getting fully vaccinated. So it's a slow increase, but the most important thing is that there is an increase in the first place. And then couple this increased vaccination rate with the fact that we're passing this high peak point of our next COVID surge, and we're seeing a significant drop in the per-day positivity rate in the United States. For the last 7-day average was about 152,177 positive cases per day. Now, we have a graph that if we look to, we can show that the per-day positivity rate then has actually been significantly higher at its peak point. If we look to the furthest right point of the graph, we'll see that there was a peak towards the beginning of September, but if we look to today, it's going down significantly. The specific number, the positivity rate reached about 185 to 190,000 positive cases per day. We've seen a significant decline since then, and we're hoping that the continued trend is that we're going to be seeing a continued decrease, because if we look to earlier parts of the graph, that is what we've seen, a peak and then a downward trend. Then in terms of the state of Illinois, again, the vaccination rate continues to increase at around 51.7%, upwards of about 0.2% from our 2 days ago check-in. And then the positivity rate continues to fluctuate between 3,500 and 4,500. Today, it sits at around 4,000 exactly. And so the point is, the state of Illinois hasn't seen huge increases in the positivity rate, but it's continuing to maintain that lower positivity rate than compared to a state like Florida, which has 11,000 positive cases per day. But what's important to note is that the state of Florida, which had 15,000 cases literally just 2 days ago, now only has 11,000 positive cases per day. And so the state of Florida is continuing to see a rapid decline as well, which is very, very important in terms of the country's trajectory in COVID. Then we'll look at some main COVID headlines that are going around today. The first thing is the fact that tomorrow, the FDA is meeting to discuss the announcement of the booster shot and the approval of the third dose. And so, Dr. Murphy, do you know a little bit more about what's going to be happening at this conference tomorrow?
Well, tomorrow is not a conference. It's actually the Advisory Committee, an external and internal committee that meets, or an external committee that meets with the FDA to review the results and go over the FDA recommendations. This has been around for quite a while, and they're meeting tomorrow. They are expected to come to some kind of conclusion within 3 days, so that would be Monday, the 20th. And, you know, it's very likely that they're going to give the booster recommendation and revise the EUA, the emergency use authorization, to go ahead and give boosters to people for Pfizer.
Yeah. And so then building off of that, I guess the next point to bring up is just the idea that there are a significant amount of doses going around. And so with this booster shot, what is the hesitation, I guess, that has caused all this controversy and this discussion about giving it to this next group of people?
Yeah, that's a good point. And it actually brings up two things. One is completely independent of the global situation. is when is the optimal time to give a booster shot? I think everybody today, every expert in the field agrees that at some particular point, we are going to need a booster. We see the effect of the vaccination schedule that we're giving now, the 2 doses of the Pfizer and Moderna and the 1 dose of the Johnson & Johnson is declining. The effect is declining. There's more infections in the vaccinated people. There are more hospitalizations and more deaths in the vaccinated people from the pre-Delta period. So Delta has been kind of the game changer here. So it's not a question of you're not going to need a booster. The question is, when should that booster come? And there's valid scientific arguments that say we should wait longer. And there's arguments that say we should give it now. Other countries have voted to give it or determined to give the boosters now. So many countries in Europe and in Israel, they're giving the boosters now to various groups, some the entire population, some just everybody over 60 or people who have some risk. That's really the difference. The other issue is what the global people are saying is, hey, look, we don't have enough vaccinated people. We need more vaccine. You're going to give boosters. We don't even have enough vaccine to give to the people in the globe. And we have to have global immunity, global herd immunity. So, you look at the numbers. Okay, globally, 2.3 billion people are vaccinated around the world. That's a number. There's a little over 7 billion people in the world. They're going in the right direction. And in the United States, we've got 180 million people are fully vaccinated. And that would mean 180 million booster doses are necessary, plus what we need to vaccinate the rest of the people. Well, that 180 million out of the billions that are needed, I mean, frankly, it's a drop in the bucket.
Right.
And the production of these vaccines, and there are multiple vaccines approved around the world. Some work better than others. The ones work here are really pretty good. But the capacity to make the vaccines has increased dramatically. And so, the current position that the United States has is we can do both. We can give boosters here, and we can provide doses, globally to our partners around the world. And there's no reason why we can't do both.
Awesome. And then building off of that, aside from vaccine treatment, we've seen other various drugs been tested on COVID, trial and error. And one of the main drugs that was proposed was Remdesivir towards the beginning of the pandemic, actually, because it is an antiviral medication that is used to typically treat COVID and respiratory illnesses in the past, as well as the Ebola virus, which it was initially used for. And so but after significant studies, there was found that there was actually no clinical benefit to use Remdesivir in patients who were admitted to the hospital for COVID. So with that in mind, are there any new treatments that aren't, I guess, vaccine related or maybe vaccine related that could be coming to a forefront in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, first a little bit about Remdesivir. It was originally developed for hepatitis C, Ebola, and Marburg virus, and was basically there, ready to be used. It looked like it had some activity. It is an antiviral drug. So this is, at least it's that compared to some of the more alternative therapies that are out there that don't have any activity at all. But anyway, so, it had some activity, and in the height of the pandemic, it was used, and the results were very undramatic. There was no survival benefit, but patients tended to stay in the hospital for a shorter period of time and be less sick. And so it was approved based on that. So kind of very modest impact. But because of the antiviral activity and this modest clinical impact, it got approved, and then everybody is going on Remdesivir in the United States. Well, the WHO has like a different kind of mandate, and they're talking about giving drugs around the world. Remdesivir is an intravenous drug. It's got to be, given in the hospital to really sick patients. And they looked at dozens of studies done around the world, did a meta-analysis of all of them, and found no survival benefit at all. So they basically just took it off the shelf. They're not interested in studying it or giving it to anybody. This study that you're referring to verifies the same thing. There's really no survival benefit. I mean, it's a very weak drug. Probably it works in a few people, but or a low proportion of people. But we've got to find something better. And there's 3 drugs in development now that people don't hear about enough. One is the drug by Ridgeback Pharmaceuticals and Merck. It's a polymerase inhibitor that has antiviral activity. They treated it in very sick patients, which is too late to take that kind of drug. But anyway, they had some modest activity. They are in the later phases of development. I mean, that drug could be approved within 6 months, maybe even shorter. Then there's the Atea drug, AT528, or 527, or I can't remember the number. But anyway, they have this, they're in the same ballpark, and they're partnering with Roche Pharmaceuticals, the big Swiss pharmaceutical company. Then Pfizer has 2 drugs, one intravenous and one oral in earlier development. These are protease inhibitors, and they could also work. So like Tamiflu with the flu, with influenza, we may have oral therapy within 6 months, and that could be a huge game changer. So we need to focus a little bit more on the newer, more potent drugs than stick around with these original drugs that came out that have very modest activity. So I think the future looks very bright. This is a virus with many different targets on it. Right. We could come up with some cocktail. We did it with HIV. We can do it with COVID.
And then looking at future implications, I think that kind of brings up the question that a lot of people have is, with all this science going around, with all the studies that are being done right now, have there been any, real actual significant harms that COVID has posed? And so one thing that people found after doing study, the European Journal of Clinical Investigation found that myocarditis was actually found in close to 5% of around 720,000 patients. And so I don't know if this is, this study is complete. Dr. Murphy, I asked for your guidance here in terms of, are we seeing a lot of myocarditis in pediatric patients as well as patients of an older age? And do you think that this trend could cause fatalities in the future?
Well, myocarditis can be a very serious disease. It can be life-threatening. And we don't know long-term consequences. I mean, it's a bad side effect. Now, how much is there? Well, first of all, there is myocarditis that happens in the general population anyway, probably because people are exposed to other viruses, especially in the summertime, young men. So it tends to be males and younger males that get this, but of course anybody can get it. So doctors, clinicians have to keep their eye out for this thing. But so far, of all people who've had the vaccine, 170 million in the United States, only 2,574 have been reported. So that's a very, very low percent. And then the number of deaths, like totally serious disease, is in basically the single digits. There is a case reported from New Zealand recently. I mean, there are cases out there, but I mean, it is really low. And there's a lot more people dying from getting COVID than from this one particular side effect. So, you always have to weigh the risk and the benefit. Do you want to look at how many people have over 600 and some 30,000 people have died from COVID? I mean, just in the United States alone, that's astronomical. That's like, it's just incredible how many people have died. So, these side effects, you got to look at them very carefully and see exactly what the risk is. What's the risk of not taking the vaccine?
Right. Awesome. So now we can move on to our viewer asked questions part of the segment. And so we'll start with the first one. There are just a ton of questions and confusion because of the studies that have been published about the efficacy of Pfizer versus Moderna. Several people and several studies have come out and said that Moderna has shown to have a higher efficacy rate over time. And so people are now considering to make a switch from Pfizer to Moderna. And Dr. Murphy, I'm just asking for some clarification here. Is there really a confirmed answer in which vaccine has a higher efficacy rate?
No, they're close, whatever it is. And, most of the data appear to be really in laboratory results, antibody levels, and the immunologic response. There are some clinical studies that show there is more protection maybe in the Moderna versus the Pfizer one. But remember, these are not randomized clinical trials. It's not like 10,000 people sign up and you randomly assign one to the other. These are just observations of people who took this vaccine versus that vaccine, and they're not necessarily the same group. I'm not saying that Moderna is not better, but it's not dramatically better. Pfizer gives a really good response, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine also keeps people out of the hospital and keeps everybody alive. So at this point, there's some debate here, and we should do more study and figure out really which one is the best. You remember at the beginning, Pfizer had better results. They were 95% effective, and the other one was 88 or 89%, whatever. I mean, this is going to wax and wane depending on the population being studied and the variant that is present there. So I think for all practical purposes, you can stick with either of the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer or Moderna, at this particular point. But this is an issue that is going to continue to be studied.
Right. And then another question that is brought up is regarding transmission of COVID. And so again, there have been several reports that, it's not really much of an aerosol virus anymore. It doesn't really transmit through the air as effectively as we initially thought. And so I guess what is kind of the main concern with COVID in terms of transmission, and where would you feel like you're most susceptible to getting it?
Yeah, it's well known that the major transmission route is through respiratory droplets. So really direct respiratory contact. Aerosolization, where the virus is in the air in a room, can occur. It has occurred. It's been well documented, but it's much lower than the respiratory transmission part. And the environmental surfaces, we used to think it was 6% of all the cases. And this happens with other diseases as well, environmental transmission. But the virus is pretty fragile on environmental surfaces. And that turns out to be much, much less of a risk. So, I don't know if anyone even has a number. It's probably less than 1%.
Awesome. And then the next question is, with everyone going back to work, obviously there are situations that people are going to feel uncomfortable in terms of safety precautions. And so one person is reaching out and asking if, almost 100% of the office is vaccinated, but one person isn't, and they have some immunocompromised family members at home. They are wondering if it's safe to be working in that space if their desks are barely 6 feet apart. However, they're not wearing masks, and there isn't really social distancing during conversations. And so, they're just wondering if they should be concerned or if they're overreacting.
Yeah. No, this is, unfortunately, Delta has changed all the recommendations in these particular settings. Delta is so contagious. All right. What I would recommend to this group, whoever is leading it, the unvaccinated person can no longer come in the office. And if they have to be in the office and they won't take the vaccine, they should be terminated. I mean, this is being done in companies around the country and around the world. The desks being 6 feet apart that's enough. All right. But now the big question is, do you have to wear a mask? So the safest thing would be to wear a mask if you're in a room that has other people, even though they're 6 feet apart. So the whole cubicle thing, unfortunately, people should be wearing a mask in those cubicles. Now, if you have an individual private office where you can actually even close the door while you're in there alone, you don't have to wear a mask. In the communal areas, everybody has to be masked. Matter of fact, a lot of companies have sort of banned the communal areas that, they're not having people eat lunch together unless they can be outside and really socially distanced. And, so anyhow, so that's kind of the story with these companies. So they've got to determine the policy. As you know, the guidelines that are going into place about vaccinated people in the workplace is, there are mandates all over the place now. Over 100 million people are going to be affected by the last change in the guidelines about mandates. This is only going to get worse. So, get vaccinated, lower your risk so you don't get this terrible disease.
I mean, it's been said time and time again, regardless of your vaccination status, the masks typically can get the job done.
Yep.
So the next question is kind of backpedaling a little bit, going back to the booster concept, and tons of talk about Pfizer and Moderna, their mRNA vaccines, so they're kind of the forefront of what's being tested right now. But Johnson and Johnson is still there, and people who got Johnson and Johnson are wondering if they will need a booster shot and when it will be available, if that information is, out there.
So Johnson and Johnson, it's an interesting vaccine. It's a very different type of vaccine. It's a viral vector vaccine. It's in terms of single doses, it's the most potent. All right, but we don't know about 2 doses. They have a 2-dose study going on with 60,000 people supposedly. Those results are not available yet. We'll see. Maybe 2 doses is better. I mean, better than the Pfizer Moderna. Those are mRNA vaccines. So that's a study on initial treatment strategy. The booster is another story altogether. They're way, they were last on the market. I think it was in March they got approved, February or March, and so they're a little bit behind in all that, but they're doing a study. What is going to come out of the FDA review on Monday is that probably the Pfizer vaccine will be approved. That's what it's looking like. Moderna will be about a month behind that, and Johnson & Johnson will be behind that. But in the interim, we'll see what this advisory board says. A lot of people are giving the Moderna or Pfizer a booster or considering it in people who even had the J&J vaccine.
Right.
So that's this mix and match approach. There's pluses and minuses to that. But all these vaccines are really pretty safe.
Okay. And then actually, that's a perfect segue into the next question regarding mix and match. Just not to do with the Johnson & Johnson, but people who have read the studies that we had talked about previously about Moderna versus Pfizer. There was some confusion. Obviously, we had kind of clarified that a little bit, but if someone is still concerned, they're wondering, is it possible to switch from Pfizer to Moderna or vice versa?
Well, I mean, you can, but you may not have that luxury because the government owns all the vaccines and they're giving it out the way they want to give it out.
That's true.
So you can find some places are only giving the Moderna vaccine and some are only giving the Pfizer vaccine, and then the next week it can be switched around. So it's not like you can pick and choose. You can't go into a doctor's office and say, I want the Moderna vaccine.
Right.
Doesn't exist yet. You can sort of wiggle your way through the system here and get one or the other, but you don't actually get to pick at this particular point. But more data will be coming forward, and now you have the Pfizer vaccine is fully approved. I mean, they have a trade name and everything, and Moderna will come close after that, and then they may start competing. But right now, the government owns all the vaccine. You can't even buy it privately.
Right. And then the next question is regarding a high school teacher who's obviously around kids all the time. She's fully vaccinated. But as we've all heard, with school coming back, lots of kids have developed COVID or they've been asked to quarantine because of a possible COVID outbreak in the school. And so, with her home situation, she has a relative who is a retired nurse who does not want to get vaccinated, therefore she is unvaccinated. And so this teacher is just curious, is it safe for her to be around this retired nurse who is unvaccinated because of her work environment? Is it safe for her husband who actually works at home? And she's kind of just wondering what she should do with regards to this relative.
No, this person is a danger to the people that she's around. That's clear. And that's why all these mandates are going into place as part of OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Authority, that it's going under that guidelines that if unvaccinated people are a risk to vaccinated and other unvaccinated people. And, they should, this is a risky situation now. Being around anybody who's unvaccinated, the chances of getting sick and in the hospital and dying is so much higher. Who wants that? Who needs it? Why this nurse doesn't trust doctors? I don't know. Most of the nurses I work with, we have a very good relationship and everybody's like on the same team. I don't know what happened. The bottom line is it's not safe to be around unvaccinated people for whatever reason they're not vaccinated. They've got to really be isolated, kept away from the rest of the population.
And then the last question of the day has someone who was watching her grandson, and then the grandson tested positive. This was on Sunday, and she's scheduled for a test on Thursday. And she's wondering if she comes back negative, what are the procedures and protocol that are now in place with the Delta variant, vaccinations, all that she should be taking after she takes this test.
Yeah, this is so common. So the kids, even though they don't get sick, they're spreading it to everybody else, whether you're vaccinated or not. But anyhow, once you're exposed like this is a high-risk exposure. The quarantine officially is 14 days. However, it can be reduced down to 10 days. She's negative at like 4 or 5 days here, but she can't get out of quarantine. The earliest she can get out is 10 days. And that's based on how bad the epidemic is going on in a certain area. So you have to look at your local public health officials. So,
Right.
It's either the Department of Health in the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois or whatever state you happen to be in, whether 10 days is short enough. And generally it is. Now, there's another thing you can do. At day 7, you can repeat the molecular tests, the PCR test or the LAMP test, some molecular tests, which are better than the rapid tests that you can buy in the pharmacy. If you repeat that and that's negative, some places allow you to get out of quarantine after 7 days.
Awesome. Well, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much, Dr. Murphy, for all your help.
Thank you, Vinay.
And-
Thank you, Kristen.
Yep. Awesome.